Shabbat Shalom. For all of the beginnings of this morning's Torah reading, the wonders of creation, the Garden of Eden, the formation of the first human beings, we miss an important part of the Parsha if we overlook that it's as much about endings as it is about beginnings. Adam and Eve expelled from the garden. Adam and Eve facing the fact of their own mortality. And of course, Cain rising up to kill his brother Abel. On this Shabbat of beginnings, we here in this room feel the endings. 1 week ago today, waking up to the news of bloodshed in Israel. Some 1,300 human souls murdered, wiped out, ended at the villainous hands of Hamas. Over 3,000 injured, over 150 men, women, children, and seniors taken hostage, their condition unknown, their fate in the hands of their vicious captors. We are appropriately so outraged and horrified by the news, the images, and the bloodshed coming out of Israel. Our Torah reading reminds us that shocking as the news may be, the fact of bloodshed itself is not new. It's been there all along since the very beginning, lives ending in bloodshed since Cain killed Abel. Last night, if you were here, we gathered as a community, an evening that spoke to the head with analysis, the heart with prayer and song. We heard a first-hand account of the atrocities. We heard from Mayor Adams, and we bore witness to inspiring acts of tzedakah, charitable giving for those in need of relief. Park Avenue Synagogue has very nearly reached our communal goal of $18 million to UJA's Israel Emergency Campaign, and just a few more bold QR scans by you here today on your Shabbat handout, and I'm confident that we will get there. This morning, I want to take a different angle and look at the battle on a different front, deeply honored as we are by a visit from Jonathan Greenblatt, a hero to our people, a friend to our community, a personal friend, the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League. Because whether it is physical anti-Semitic assaults or stemming the spread of online hate, or as is the case this week, fighting the fight against anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, Jonathan and his team at the ADL are working tirelessly on behalf of our people and all people to confront bigotry and discrimination wherever it rears its ugly head. This past week, Jonathan, I've seen you at rallies, I've seen you on the news, I've read you in the paper. You're everywhere, you're busy. We're honored by your presence, and we are honored by your family's presence spending Shabbat with us this morning. If you read Genesis chapter 4, verse 8, the passage in which Cain actually kills Abel, you'll notice that the text is not just laconic, but curiously incomplete. It reads, Vayomer Cain el Hevel, vayhi behotam basadeh. And Cain said to Abel, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up upon his brother and killed him. The brothers, it would seem, spoke to each other, but the text never actually says what they said to each other. There's no record of the exchange that prompted Cain to rise up and commit murder. Not surprisingly, the history of interpretation since has had a field day in the lacuna of the text. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Bible, fills it in, as does the Samaritan Pentateuch. Some commentators imagine a dialogue filled with enmity, others fraternal jealousy, still others suggest a dispute between the brothers over their parents' inheritance. There are literally dozens of answers given by the rabbis, and while I understand the impulse, the need to explain, to try to justify what Cain did, to give his heinous deed a context, with all due respect to my rabbinic predecessors, I think that they have it all wrong. It's the fragmented nature of the verse that provides its moral clarity, the ellipse within its very point. There is nothing that could have happened, that could have been said, that could have justified Cain murdering his brother. The Bible refuses to enter any attempt at moral equivocation, to say that Abel had it coming, that Cain's actions were somehow warranted. There is nothing that could rationalize Cain's crime, so the Torah stops itself from doing so. It's a message consistent with the prior scene, the fruit of the garden, the humanity moment that we learn the difference between good and evil, right and wrong. If there's a point to these first few chapters of the Torah, as Ben and Lucy taught us, it's to remind us that we have agency over our decisions, that there is right and there is wrong, and there is no world in which Cain's murderous deeds could find justification. The stories we have heard, the images to which we have been subjected, from which we must protect our children, are important if only because they reveal the truth about Hamas. Our eyes are filled with tears, but in those tears we have moral clarity. We see Hamas for who they really are: barbarism and depravity, families bound and burnt alive. We here reject any moral equivalency. This is not a land dispute. This is not about competing aspirations for national sovereignty, a he said, she said, about conflicting dual narratives. This is a face of evil revealed, a fascist, violent, and genocidal Islamist ideology that would kill Jews for being Jews, that would murder for sport, that neither represents the Muslim faith, the national interests of the Palestinian people, or any future of coexistence. Aside from providing comfort, going to rallies, and raising a lot of money, in the days gone by, an overwhelming amount of my time has been spent hearing of the moral equivalencies being shared in response to the heinous deeds of Hamas. Not just in the cesspool of social media or news sites that choose to call a terrorist a militant as opposed to the murderers they really are, or the usual suspects fiddling at the lines between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, but in the places that give life, that shape the minds of our young people and lead cultural conversations: our universities, our high schools, and sometimes even younger. People in positions of intellectual authority unable to perform the simple act of calling evil, evil, of condemning targeted violence against innocents. Administrations who will weigh in on anything, speak out and take action against microaggressions, against any subset of humanity, except when that subset of humanity are Jews. Who would create safe spaces for every people, but not my people? Who would invoke free speech when they should be calling out anti-Semitism? Who would cancel you for your misuse of pronouns, even as the banner of their Facebook pages bears a Hamas paraglider? The moral cowardice of those very leaders entrusted to teach a generation the difference between good and evil, now holding their tongue. Friends, this is not hard. Rape is not a form of protest. Killing babies is not an expression of one's conscience. Taking hostages is not the tool of a freedom fighter. Evil is evil. And yet in their silence, in their mealy-mouthed statements, there are those who find it so hard just to say so. Were it to be any other people, the response would be clear, quick, and unforgiving. The fact that when it comes to Jewish lives, their response is what it is cause for serious soul-searching by them, their institutions, and anyone who chooses to support them. Of all the emotions I've experienced this past week, shock, horror, outrage, and anger, the emotion I did not expect but affects me deeply is sadness, at the lives lost and a world of pain, of course. But as a parent of 4 college students, as a rabbi who has had more than one parent crying in my office this past week over what is taking place in our children's schools, the sadness of the loneliness and the fear of our children who find themselves without allies, without a voice, and without moral leadership. This is, at its core, the work of the ADL, to create a world without hate, hate against Jews, but really against anyone, to throw a flag on the field when need be, to cut off the roots and fruits of hatred, to build alternative visions of dialogue based on respect and engagement, and most of all, to provide moral clarity, to call out good and evil, black and white, when others would have you just see shades of gray. It's a work of the ADL. It's a work of all of us. As many of you know, I have no shortage of nieces and nephews. I love them all, and I'm proud of them all. But 2 in particular have been especially in my heart this week. One, of course, my nephew in the IDF, presently serving in his tank unit in Gaza. The second, a college student, a fun-loving, scholar-athlete, baseball-playing mensch enrolled in a college I won't name in the Northeast. I will not read you the full letter the President wrote in response to the terror, only the first and last line. It will be enough to give you a taste. Dear students, he wrote on Monday, during a long weekend meant for rest and rejuvenation and continued reflection on the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging on Indigenous Peoples Day, a number of tragic events around the world left many of us shaken. And the letter concluded, let us remember to be mindful of the different ways that world events can impact our community, and let's take care of one another in the remainder of the semester. My nephew, God bless him, would have none of it, and with a ferocity that a runner is picked off first base, he shot out a letter to the President. Again, I'll read you just 2 sentences from my nephew's letter. While the situation between Israelis and Palestinians is complicated, the condemnation of terrorism should not be. And then he wrote, this should not be looked as an issue between Israelis and Palestinians, but about humanity against terrorism. My nephew requested that the President release a revised statement condemning acts of terror. And guess what happened? The President did. Who knows? Who knows how many people, students, and funders responded? But in my nephew's mind and in his uncle's mind, it was his letter that prompted the course correction. I'm so very proud of my nephew for what he did, but most of all for his reminder that if a college student can speak up with moral clarity to the president of his university, then how much more so we in this room should be standing up to the pernicious moral equivalencies of the hour. In the work of the ADL, in our support of the ADL, we here at Park Avenue Synagogue fight the good fight. But it's not just the ADL. It's each of us in our workplaces, in our pocketbooks, in our board positions, on our campuses, and on our school boards. We all have a role to play, to find our voices and empower and educate those who need help to find their voices. There is good and there is evil, and sometimes it's just not very hard. There's nothing that justifies the evil we have witnessed this week, and it's up to each of us and all of us to make that crystal clear to this world.